Hi there, and welcome back to Cyber Triage Basics. In this session, we're having a look at using the command line version of the Cyber Triage Collector. Before we get started, quick review of what we know so far. First of all, file collection rules need to be configured before extracting the collector. The collector folder, once it's extracted, contains a number of different executables, both the GUI and the command line, and older versions for Windows Vista and Windows XP. The collector itself must be run with administrative privileges. If you don't do that, it's not going to work, unfortunately. By default, the command line collector, if it's run without any arguments, will just run the default collection, which means basically everything, with the output file saved to the same location or same directory that the collector is run from. There are a number of different options you can apply to the command line version of the collector that give you a wide range of configuration flexibility. That's especially useful if you need to build the collector into a script or when you need to deploy it using either your EDR or something like Intune, where you want to push it out to a very large number of hosts. And really, the GUI is just a friendly interface to the command line collector. So you can use either. GUI is great if you just need to do a quick collection on one system, but really if you need to deploy at scale, then you're going to be using the command line version. The command line options are grouped into 4 different categories: output, network, collection, and input. The focus of this session is going to be on 2 of those, output and collection. So starting with output, pretty straightforward, -O, and then you provide a path to where you want the JSON file, that collection file, to be written. Note that you also need to provide a name for that collection file. The important thing here, or the valuable part here, is that if, for example, you are running collection over the network, you want everything to write back to a network share, then you can provide that path and everything's going to be dumped back into that single folder. Also means that if you want to write protect the directory that the collector has actually been run from and all those configuration files as well, make sure that they're write protected, then it's easy to do so because your output file is going to be written to a different location. And just as we saw with the GUI, you can apply a password to the created JSON file, just passing that encrypt out file password option and then writing the password twice. Where things get really interesting is with the collection options. For starters, you can specify data types, and these are the same data types that we saw in with the GUI. In with the GUI, you get the checkbox when you're using the command line, --d types, and then a series of codes for the different data type you want to collect. And we'll look at those codes on the next slide. You can also specify a path to that file collection rule set. This is useful if you do actually have created multiple file collection rule sets for different types of investigations. For example, an internal investigation versus a ransomware investigation. Then you may have that collection, some of our customers do have that collection of different file sets made up, and then they just choose which one they're going to use when they actually run that collection. Next, we also have the ability to download those rule sets from the server. So provided you are running Teams version, you've got server running inside your network, you can tell the collector to go and connect into the server and pull that file down. Now, the next 2 options are super important because they can massively reduce the size of that JSON file and also the time it takes to collect. Obviously, reducing the size also reduces the time it takes to transfer it over the network. Starting with skip file contents. And when we talk about skipping file contents, we're talking about the files that are collected by Cyber Triage as being potentially relevant to an investigation. So they are the executables and other files that we've identified as being run recently or accessed recently that could be significant and then are collected by default. So if you use this option, they're not going to be collected. That obviously means that you then can't upload executables to the sandbox for analysis, but at the same time, the collection is going to be faster and that resultant JSON file is going to be smaller. When we talk about source files or skipping source files, we're talking about the actual artifacts, the operating system artifacts that we pull most of the information from, provide you those items within Cyber Triage. Those source files, things like the registry files and the event logs, provide us with a heap of useful information. Now, the Cyber Triage Collector can process those artifacts on the endpoint, load that information up into the JSON file, and by default, it also copies those source files so that you can then go and analyze them in some other tool later on, should you need to. If you choose not to collect them, then once again, the size of that collection file is going to be much smaller, and transfer over the network and things is also going to be much faster. And finally, we have the option to specify the temp directory. Some temporary files are written during the collection process. If you do need to customize it and you want to make sure that it's saved, for example, to a local machine rather than network drive, obviously that's going to make a bit of difference to time, then you can do that with this option. Looking at the data types, these are exactly the same data types that we went through when we were looking at collection with the GUI. The 2-digit, 2-character codes, I think, are pretty straightforward and easy enough to remember. If in doubt, you can always draw up the help from the command line tool. Just having a look at one example here that we could run. We're going to run the collector, cybertriagecollector.exe. We're going to specify the output is going to the G drive, to a collections folder, and we're giving it the name of that JSON file, or the collection file itself. We're making this a fast one. We're going to skip file contents, and we're also going to skip the source file contents, and we're going to specify the data types as just the logon, web browser activity, and processes. So that collection is going to be pretty fast. And what we'll do now is just run you through a couple of different collections, a couple of different examples of actually running this tool at the command line so you can see what it all looks like. So here we are with Cyber Triage on our G drive, in our evidence drive, in fact. So we need to start the command prompt, make sure that we are launching that as administrator, and then switch to our G drive. Once we've done that, we can change to the Cyber Triage directory, and then we're just, for the first instance, just going to run the collector on its own. And you'll see here that we can now see our temp folder, our output folder, and you can see it progressing through each of those different artifacts that is being collected. I should note that these have been accelerated a little bit. For our second run, we're going to do the more targeted collection where we're skipping file contents and skipping source file contents. Our data types, we are going for triggered tasks, processes, and network activity. So this is the sort of thing you would be using if you had suspicions there was something malicious running on your network. You want to get a list of all those processes, and you want to see and check persistence mechanism, which is what those trigger tasks is going to give you, and then network connections, see if there's anything actively running on the network that we need to be worried about. For our third and final run, we are going to be collecting the files. So you notice that we do not have skip files mentioned anywhere there. And for our data types, we are targeting web activity and logons. So in this example, we may be a little concerned about activity that's been going on, maybe user activity on the endpoint, and in particular what sort of websites and things they have been accessed. And you can see there, that one ran nice and fast. Now the three collections are loaded. We can see that the complete collection, this one down the bottom, actually had 25 bad, 156 suspicious, whereas the targeted collection actually picked up 24 bad and 159 suspicious. So one of the reasons for those differences is that in addition to using heuristics to identify something as bad, we do also do some additional testing to eliminate false positives. So if we are doing a targeted collection, it's entirely possible that it will end up, as has happened in this case, with a few more false positives than if we had done a complete collection and had more information there that actually allows us to eliminate some suspicious activity. As we dive into these hosts and just have a look at what we're picking up. So key thing to appreciate, obviously, this is the complete collection. We have all our files. We can go to collection details and we can see here that we have 870 source files that are available. Whereas if we have a look at logon only, collection and check out our collection details there. We only have 260. So remember here, when we went with this one, we weren't saying don't collect the source files and also the related files. So in this instance, we do have some files collected, but there's only files in relation to logon and web browser activity on our process. And this is actually a really good example of why processes, network activity, and triggered tasks are super important. We have a look here and we have 0 collected source files. So even though we have a large number of detections, we just have the details of the items saved to those JSON files. And for example, we have a file here, dcontrol.exe. Might want to look at that in more detail, but because we have not collected that source file, we're not going to be able to export it and send it off to the sandbox or upload it for further analysis. In summary, the command line collector has more options than the GUI, provides you with an even higher level of flexibility, and most importantly, allows you to conduct really targeted collections. The benefits of these targeted collections is that they can be much faster as you end up with a smaller collection of files. The downside of that is that those files are not available for analysis if they haven't been collected, which then reduces the visibility of bad and suspicious activity. I hope this has been helpful. In the following sessions, we're going to dive into more depth on some of the more advanced methods of collecting information with Cyber Triage.